practiced. This horn is called a vuvuzela, and it is one of my favorite souvenirs that I've been able to bring back from South Africa. I picked it up in 2010, the year that South Africa hosted the FIFA World Cup, and these were selling like hotcakes. You can imagine me on the airplane with my students. It was really great. Sit down. Picture a stadium in South Africa filled with fans, each one carrying one of these and blasting it like crazy. You can imagine that some people, particularly the opposing team and the people on the field, they were not particularly amused by this, and they actually applied to have them banned. But FIFA said no. In many ways, the Apostle Paul is much like my vuvuzela as he entered the arenas with a strong voice, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. It's not surprising that many who heard this loud voice found him irritating and distracting, and they attempted to get him banned. What most folks outside of South Africa, and that included me, didn't realize is that the vuvuzela is not a toy of torment, but it has roots in South African culture that go back centuries. Early inhabitants of South Africa often stayed far outside of community centers to hunt and gather. One day, a creative individual discovered that blowing in a ram's horn made a very unique sound that caused people to wake up. I learned that blowing the ram's horn was not used as a warning, but as celebration. It was to call people in, scattered far and wide, to the town center to hear good news that would be welcome to their ears. So too, Paul used his voice to celebrate the risen Christ and to tell the world far and wide that knowing this news, knowing that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, who then gave his life by hanging on a cross for each of us, that those who believed and heard this trumpet sound would gain victory over death. That's pretty good news, and that's probably worth being woken up out of our daily lives to be able to hear. As a professor of communication studies, I know that it's difficult to get people to hear the messages that you really want to get across. Just ask my mother. You see, problem is that for many people to hear, they have to be able to get over blocking out what they don't like with walls. Too many times in our society, words cause division, and visceral responses come to us when we hear certain words like Democrat, Republican, pro-Palestinian, anti-Semite, anti-abortion, pro-life, Fox News, MSNBC. All of these can cause defensive walls to quickly come up if we are not open to dialogue. Effective speakers know that to heighten their chance that people will listen to them, they need to be what research scholars Hart and Burks call rhetorically sensitive. In short, rhetorically sensitive speakers think more about others than about themselves. I suggest that Paul was rhetorically sensitive, and particularly so in the passage from today found from the book of Acts. Here, Paul addresses a predominantly Gentile audience in Athens. This text provides tremendous insight into the mind of Paul because uniquely in the Bible, this is the only time we actually hear Paul speak. Think about this from Sunday school. You know, Paul's pretty famous, right? But why? Because of his great speeches? No, it's his letters. So here in the Bible, we have this little gem, this time of speaking where we see how does Paul interact with people who are really face to face with him. Hart and Burks identify 4 characteristics of rhetorically sensitive people. I'm going to cover the first 2, and then we're going to go back and see what Paul did with this. The first is recognition that we all play multiple roles and that we are a composite of the roles that we have. So, for example, I am a husband, I am a father, and I am a member of the ASAP Adopt to South Africa preschool board of coordinators. So, husband, father, board member. That's who I am. Take just a second and come up and just think in your mind, what are 3 roles that you have? Who are you? A husband, father, a board member? Now, here is the big ooh-ah-ah question. Who determines those roles? Who determines who you are? This is a big jolt for a society where we like to have control. Why, I control who I am. No. I can't be a husband without a
wife.
I can't be a father without a
Child.
I can't be a board member without a somebody else defines who I am. And guess what? Those roles change. I didn't think 2 hoots about being a father until I became one, and man, it changed my life the moment it happened. I will never forget, at my grandfather's funeral, my mother, who was 72 at the time, leaned into me and said, "It just hit me. I'm not a kid anymore." Mm-hmm. Now, I must admit, I thought, no crap, Sherlock, but, it proves this whole thing about who we are, how we relate is based not on us, but on the other. Number 2, rhetorically sensitive people understand and recognize that we can easily move between our roles. I can be a best friend, I can be a subordinate, I can be a dad, and I can do them all at the same time while even chewing bubble gum. But the problem that communicators come up with is when they react to someone outside of the role that exists. If you ever talk to your mother in the tone that you use when you're disciplining a toddler, you know exactly what I mean. It will not go well. Paul enters into his ministry first as an aggressor. Remember, he's a tax collector. He persecutes the people that he is now trying to affirm. His role switched. And as it switched, he became really intensely interested in knowing more about the people he was speaking to. In the passage, when he is in Athens, we note that he says that he is very, very concerned. In fact, it says in the passage, that he is disturbed by all of the idols that he sees. It would be very easy for him to go in to speak to the people that he is gathered with and say, "You idol worshipers, I'm going to condemn you to hell." That sound familiar with some people who use that kind of language? But guess what? He doesn't do that. He greets them as the role of a guest. He says to them, I'm going to find it here. I think I need your glasses. Yes, here we go. Yes, I found it. Paul says, people of Athens, I see in every way that you are very religious. He's complimenting them, right? He's starting not by condemning, but complimenting. And in the scripture slightly before this, before he starts talking to the people at the Areopagus, he is talking to the people who are first in the synagogue. If you look on verse 17, he says, he is speaking in the synagogue and he reasoned with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks. Now, when he's reasoning with these people, they all share a similar understanding of who God is. They're monotheistic, everybody in that room. When he goes out to the other more populated area in the Areopagus, which is located on Mars Hill, one of the highest points in Greece, he does something really unexpected by being able to talk to them about how he understands their culture. He basically ties into a widely held cultural understanding with his audience in verse 23 when he says, "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" In Athens, historians tell us that many centuries before, there was a horrible plague that was ravaging the city. And the Athenians all prayed to their gods, one at a time, and no god was answering them. And they thought, what's happening? And then it dawned on them, wait, there must be a God that we don't know about yet, and if we just pray to that God, all the problems will be taken care of. So they didn't have a name, and they thought, we'll just call it the unknown God. And they built an altar, and they put it on Mars Hill, and they prayed, and the famine, the disease, the pestilence was gone. So they valued this unknown God, these people in Athens. And when Paul said, I see one of your gods that you pray to, isn't that great? I think that's wonderful. I pray to that God too, and let me tell you who that one God is. And then he begins to talk in verses 23 to 30 of how this unknown God is the God of all creation and the God who brought us Jesus Christ. Paul also remembered the third and fourth characteristics of a rhetorically sensitive speaker. Number 3, avoid patterned behavior. People who use the same kind of catchphrases over and over and over violate what Aristotle calls ethos or credibility. As a sophomore in college, I was invited to the president's house along with a couple of other student officers, and I was really excited about this because the president wanted to talk to us about our ideas of what was wrong with the campus. And he looked at me and said, so what would your solution be? And I gave my answer, and he said, I hear you. I was elated. I walked out and I was just thrilled. I saw a couple of upperclassmate friends and I said, guess what? I just met with the president. It went so well. And one of them kind of nudged a buddy and said, did he hear you? I'm like, well, yeah. I talked to him. I said, yeah. I said, did he listen to what you said or did he hear you? And it then became pretty evident that this individual was known for saying on every subject, oh, I hear you. Now, the follow-through wasn't very good, and his popularity as a president wasn't particularly noteworthy. He failed to take action. Paul took action. He didn't speak in cliches or patterned behavior. He shared new insights with his audience, which helped to some engage. Number 4, distinguish between what can be said and what needs to be said. Ever hear somebody say, I need to get that off my chest? Why? For whose purpose? For whose benefit? Just because we think something does not mean we need to say it. and rhetorically sensitive speakers recognize this difference. That said, rhetorical sensitivity does not mean hypocrisy. Often what needs to be said is not what's wanted to be heard. The number one cause of harm to college students, whether it's Princeton or ABC Community College, is alcohol and substance abuse. No one ever wants to hear someone tell them, "You've had too much to drink." A true friend, however, will speak truth, not to condemn or gotcha, but out of a relationship of friendship, the genuine care for somebody else. It takes a lot of guts to take someone's car keys away from them, and it opens you up as an individual to a lot of anger in that moment and ridicule. But the end goal, if it's to be the role of a true friend, calls for taking a more difficult path. Paul epitomizes a rhetorically sensitive person. No one wants to be told that their religion, their faith, their style of life is misguided and wrong. It would have been so easy for Paul to have stayed in the synagogue in Athens, where he had a much more familiar audience. But because he cared so much for the betterment of humanity, he put himself into contexts like the Areopagus on Mars Hill to sound the trumpet of good news. Today we get to celebrate another messenger of good news, the news of justice, equity, and peace. Nelson Mandela found himself in a public square that did not necessarily want to hear his messages. Some found him irritating and disturbing, and they wanted him banned. And so for 19 years, they put him away in Robben Island. His childhood upbringing in the Methodist Church gave him a foundation that he needed to embrace the Bible and the message of God's love through Christ. In his autobiography and in works by other biographers, it is accounted that Mandela regularly read the Bible almost on a daily basis during his imprisonment. And Scripture helped to form his admiration of Christ and the Christ-like acts produced by Gandhi and Martin Luther King. When Mandela assumed the presidency of South Africa, he borrowed the strategy of seeing value in everyone and finding points of connectivity that can lead to greater unity. The award-winning film Invictus, with Morgan Freeman in the starring role, depicts this by Mandela's insistence, to understand the unknown God, to find that unifying force. In the film, the character of Mandela showcases the national green and gold Springbok team. And eventually, when they win the world championship, it gives common ground for unity across the white, black, and colored residents of that country in a way that few other concepts could. Mandela tirelessly championed educational opportunities. He once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." To this end, he prioritized public education, and that was not an easy accomplishment. You have to realize the apartheid government used education as a weapon to instill their values. So for almost a whole generation of young people in South Africa, education, schools, were to be feared and to be pressed upon. But Mandela said those days are over. And as you heard just a few moments ago, he actively sought to reach young preschool children as well. It's never too early to begin. Like Paul, Mandela continued to sound the trumpet, and improvements occurred. It is easy for Westerners to hold pity for young people in South African Township who have so little means and resources, and they perceive that they will never find the success of their counterparts in America or in Europe. Yet, in my privileged nearly 3 decades of interaction with these children, I am consistently amazed at how virtually every young child I meet can speak 3 languages. I will never forget when a little child looked up at me and said, "How many languages do you speak?" This is one of the many reasons why I am so proud to be part of the Adopt a South Africa preschool program. Embracing Mandela's passion for education, the educational toys that ASAP provides these preschool children, coupled with the training that young adults receive on how to use these materials, is improving lives. You'll see it by looking at that short video. It is astounding. When we got to travel there in 2024, we saw with our own eyes what difference it is making. Every child on every continent should have an ASAP working with them. The Bible tells us that Paul didn't score an A+ or a 1/100 in Athens that day. Verse 23 reports that when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. Thanks to the rhetorically sensitive Paul, who knew that he played multiple roles, that he was flexible in moving between them, that he avoided cliches and stylized behavior, and that he recognized the difference between what can be said and what needs to be said, even if it's not always what you want to hear. Some of the people who heard him became followers, and they believed. Those heard the trumpet.